This is a special DragonCon production by the Interstellar Research Group's YouTube video series team of From Here to the Stars. We would like to thank the director of DragonCon's science fiction literary track, Sue Phillips, for this opportunity. And we truly hope you enjoy this video. All of our panelists today have contributed a science fiction story to the anthology Stellaris, People of the Stars. This anthology is a collection of both fact and fiction, stories and essays about humanity's future missions to planets which orbit stars other than our sun. But these are not robotic flybys. These missions all include sending a large number of human beings to a new world in order to expand human civilization. All of these stories are cautionary tales, ways that a mission might go wrong, or partially wrong, or at least wrong until science is used to correct what went wrong. Let's begin by briefly introducing each of yourselves, beginning with Cathe.
Hi, I'm Cathe Smith. I contributed the story The Smallest of Things to the anthology. My background is in molecular biology, entomology, and agronomy. And I was...
She also has a parrot.
Yes.
And it's...
I also have a parrot here. Sorry about that.
It's quite all right.
My background is in molecular biology, entomology, and agronomy, and I used my background to create a story of what happens when we find the new planet and things aren't quite what they should be.
Okay. Sarah, if you would introduce yourself, please.
I'm Sarah Hoyt. I write stuff. My story was totally the fault of Dr. Robert Hampson for, in the middle of a TVAW panel, breaking out with, "Now we've given grandma flippers." That lodged in the back of my brain and eventually exploded in the story, which is of a maroon colony that has to make some adaptation.
Okay. Bill, if you would, introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm William Ledbetter. I'm a science fiction writer, and I was tickled to be in this anthology with all you great folks. My story was Bridging, and it also is about when things get wrong. When they first started out their colony, they split into two groups, and that split becomes really bad. So, yeah.
Okay. Rob?
Hi, I'm Rob Hampson. I am a research scientist as well as a fiction and nonfiction writer. And Les and I work together to help put together the anthology, as well as several different collaborative efforts at the Interstellar Research Group, and as it was called at the time, the Tennessee Valley Interstellar Workshop Symposium in 2016, that a lot of this material came from.
And Les?
Yeah, hi, I'm Les Johnson. With Rob, I'm the co-editor of Stellaris, People of the Stars, the anthology that we're talking about tonight. I'm a physicist in my day job. I do work for NASA, but I do all my writing on my own time. My employer wants me to say that. And I do write science fiction as well as popular science. And I just love the format that we were able to do with the Stellaris, which mixes both science and science fiction. I contributed with Rob one of the essays, co-edited the volume, and I have a short story I'm real proud of in the collection called Nanny.
Okay. My name is Stephen Ewan Cobb, and I am the disembodied voice moderating this panel. For just over 10 years, I produced and hosted the weekly podcast, The Future and You, for which I won a Parsec Award in 2006. Currently, I am host of From Here to the Stars, which is a video series produced by the Interstellar Research Group, which was formerly known as the Tennessee Valley Interstellar Workshop. Most of the questions I will ask during this panel will be for all of you to answer, but I want to open with one question for each of you that is specific to your contribution to the anthology, although everyone is free to chime in afterward with their own ideas about it. Cathe Smith, your story is entitled The Smallest of Things. Your story is about the deadly incompatibility at a biochemical level between Earth life and the living things on the Earth-like planet that they have traveled to and are hoping to colonize. I think that this is a very likely scenario in the real world, Do you also think it's likely, or just a possibility, or maybe that it's unlikely but was exciting to examine in a short story?
The story came about because I co-authored a paper with Kenneth Roy that explored what happens when humans encounter an alien biome, and we brought up the idea that maybe there will be allergic reactions, there will be massive incompatibilities, and so from that scientific article, I got the seed for a short story and looked at, what a fictional colony's choice might be when they get planet side and figure out that there are a lot of things that they didn't realize from orbit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Does anybody have any ideas about that? Les, I've interviewed you about that same topic a number of times. Do you have any thoughts on this possibility?
Well, when I look out and think about sending colonies to other worlds, I think I'm not as optimistic as a lot of folks that we're going to find the Star Trek class M planet that we can just beam down to or land a ship on, be completely compatible with Earth life. I think that's extremely, extremely unlikely. Even with, billions of stars and planets to play with, that would be awfully coincidental. In fact, it'd be one of those things that would have me scratching my head wondering, is this really a coincidence, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's absolutely true. And I think what Cathe explores in her story is probably as close as we can imagine getting to an Earth-compatible world, where you still have some of these problems.
Mm-hmm. Rob, you have any thoughts on that?
Well, the biggest question we're going to have is we hit a non-Earth world out there somewhere. The biggest question our colonists are going to have is, do we sterilize this thing all the way down to the rock and try and rebuild it to Earth normal, or are we going to try to figure out a way to live with what's there? And living with what's there is probably going to require some adaptations, which is in fact the theme of Bill's story, of Cathe's story, and of Sarah's story, and also a little bit of the theme in my story as well, is the adaptations that humans are going to have to go through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Bill, you have any thoughts on this particular question?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, in my story, they deliberately went to a planet that had water and a gravity that was, at least partially compatible to human evolution, but they wanted a dead world that they could start with from fresh, because exactly like what Rob said, it's like they didn't want one with an existing biome that they would have to do, they would either have to modify themselves to live there, or they would have to wipe out the existing biology in order to supplant it with ours. Mm-hmm. So that was, I used that exact same idea in my story too. So.
Okay. Sarah, you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I thought part of the panel it came from, part of the fascinating, not concept, but add on to the concept of this anthology was the limits of what is human. How much can we change and remain human? Mm-hmm. And that's what I was exploring, and I think that's what the rest, most of the authors explored is, we will have changed when we go to the stars. How can we do that and still remain essentially human?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sarah, your story, Burn the Boats. It's clear from the very first paragraphs that your story involves contact with intelligent aliens. In storytelling, how do you pick out the features of alien bodies, their cultures, their civilization, that make them stand out as different or even exotic from human beings?
It doesn't involve contact with aliens.
Oh.
It's the humans themselves become aliens.
Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
It involves contact with humans who are part of a marine colony and who have modified themselves. Oh. And this is the plant colony that's unmodified and that has to look, it's testing the limits of what is human, they first view these people as utterly alien.
Mhm.
And then,
As did I.
and then they have to, I actually have problems writing aliens. So
Mhm. I thought you did a pretty good job.
I'd like to interject something there, because I think it's likely that we won't just have to adapt. We will have to probably drive our adaptation. And I know that Cathe and Rob are more qualified to speak to that than I am, because I come from a different side of the sciences. But as someone who follows a lot of the breakthroughs that are happening in biology and genetic engineering and understanding the genome and how to manipulate the genes in different things, I envision that we'll be doing that to ourselves here on planet Earth before we go to the stars. And once we get there, I think it's entirely likely that the generation of people who make the trip may not ever get to live on the planet. They may have to get there and engineer their offspring to live on the planet, which would be a whole other story we need to contribute to the anthology. But I think it's likely that kind of thing will happen.
Oh, okay. Bill, your story is called Bridging. In your story, the New World is divided into two separate factions which do not trust one another and also do not live together at all the time, at least, because one is acclimated to low gravity and the other to high. Factionalism is common in real life, not just now, but throughout all of human history, sometimes between warring nations, sometimes between rival football teams. And it certainly makes for good storytelling. But do you think we will ever figure out a way to overcome it, or will we forever be at its mercy?
Well, I don't know. It seems to be a pretty ingrained part of being human. And, like in my story, it's like the rift happened, generations before the protagonist's time period. But yet all these, the bad feelings were all still there. People still were holding grudges, even though it was like their great grandparents who screwed each other over. So it's like, and we see the same thing in history. We see the same thing in politics and in the world today. It's like, a lot of the fighting that goes on around the world is between groups who have been fighting each other for hundreds of years, and they just don't seem to have any idea how to get out of the cycle. And really getting rid of the other people seems to be the only way that they would ever be happy. So yeah, I did explore that a little bit. It's like, because we need each other. We need each other to get along, and we're all more alike than we are different. And those were things that I really wanted to come across in this story. So.
I'm wondering, do it seems to me that we're more factionalized now than we were in the past because of the internet.
Even more so than when I wrote this story. I think
Okay.
I think even in the past few years, it's gotten a lot worse, or at least in our country, in our politics, and I seeing the people, my friends going at each other's throats. I always hate that. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it's getting worse, not better.
Okay. Rob, your story is called Those Left Behind. One of the recurring themes in several of these stories is that people will be altered physically to better fit the world on which they live. If you would, describe some of the more unusual body modifications in your story and why they might be useful.
Well, I have to say that I was inspired by a number of previous stories. One was by Robert Silverberg, I believe, Half-Jack. And Half-Jack was a character who had himself turned into a half cyborg in order to be able to pilot a starship. So one half of the body was artificial and could completely plug in to all of the controls of a starship. The other was Lois McMaster's Bajol's Falling Free, in which she had a humanoid race that was modified. So instead of having 2 arms, 2 legs, actually had 4 arms because they lived all of their life in free fall. So what we see in the story in Those Left Behind is a brother and sister, where the brother has been genetically modified to a free fall environment. They're both going to be part of a colony mission. They know that they're leaving Earth forever. One is going to be mostly active as a crew member during the cruise. So his body has been biophysically altered to be much more flexible at the hip joints, lengthen the toes, and allow them to become grasping digits so that he has a much more ability to hang on and still manipulate things in free fall. Whereas his sister has been modified to be a shuttle pilot. And much like the Half-Jack character, she is basically half cyborg because she's got to be able to directly interface with the electronics, with the controls of the shuttle. And what I wanted to explore with that story is, so what about their parents who are mired in a culture that thinks this is abnormal? And I had the idea of a dysfunctional last family Thanksgiving together. And that's where the story Those Left Behind comes in and explores some of these prejudices that may occur for the people on Earth who've been left behind.
Okay. Les, your story is called Nanny. Your story is about a colonization mission that almost fails. This is made clear in the very first scene, so it's not a spoiler. On the one hand, all writers are told that in a story, something has to go wrong, else the reader will lose interest. But on the other hand, because interstellar missions will take years to complete, there could be many opportunities for failure. So my question is, do you have a high confidence that actual missions will succeed and wrote a partial failure only because fiction telling requires it? Or do you actually worry about success?
Well, of course, I'm going to worry about success. One of the things that I've learned in my day job, where I'm actually working on flight projects. I have a mission that's going to fly next year, 2021, that I've been working on for about 6 years, is there are so many things that can cause a mission to fail. And most of them are little and critical. For a small robotic mission like this, it's a solar sail mission that's going to fly. We have what are called risk management meetings. And initially, they're kind of fun, because you get a bunch of engineers and scientists in the room and they all brainstorm what can possibly go wrong. And then you realize there are so many things that could go wrong, you almost just want to not even try to do it, right? But then you rank order all the things that could go wrong, and you realize that most of those good engineering can work around. Some you'll have to have redundancy, and other risks you'll just have to live with and hope that within the lifetime of your mission you don't get unlucky, right? And so for a mission like an interstellar voyage that might take decades or centuries to go to another world in a complex biosphere with all this equipment, to quote one of the other contributors to this volume, a guy named Jim Bell, who is a nuclear engineer and did a lot of work in nuclear safety, his famous quote that I think we'll have to live with on designing these ships to avoid failure, if anybody knows this, say it with me: redundancy
is good. Redundancy.
You're right. Yep. So I really think that's what it's going to take to ensure that. But I wrote the story with that in mind, and had the one failure that you really can't correct with redundancy, and that's the human failure. Because I think in voyages like this, no matter how hard we try, as somebody said earlier on the panel, we're still human. And humans can do really good things, really stupid things, and really just dangerous things. And that's what I would worry about probably the most on a crewed starship, is the crew itself.
Okay. Now for questions which are not geared to a specific story, but I'll still call on somebody to respond first before opening up to everyone. Let me start with Les. How do you carve out time from your schedule to write? And how do you feel about it? Do you worry that you're taking time from work, family, friends, other hobbies that you've maybe had to give up?
Well, I think it's the latter. I really have given up most things except reading. I don't watch much TV. I hear people talk about these great series they're streaming during this COVID lockdown. And I'm not streaming a whole lot of TV because I have a pretty demanding day job I've been working a lot of weekends, and I write when I can. For instance, today I took actually half a day of vacation and spent the morning writing on my latest novel, which I'm writing for Baen Books. But most of the time, I get it in the evenings or on Saturdays and just whenever I have time, because it really just can't. But for me, when I started writing about 10 years ago, it really made me evaluate what I was spending, and I'm using that term quite deliberately because we only have a finite amount of this quantity of time, right? So we've got to be careful how we spend it. And I found I was spending a lot of times on things that I didn't think were necessarily that productive or enjoyable. So I've just kind of reprioritized where I spend my time. And I still watch a little TV. I find time for family, and I prioritize the family part of it and the work part of it. And then by the time I write, I just don't have time for a lot of television or much of things like that.
Cathe, I'm sure you have struggled with time.
Yes.
If you would describe your plan, your method of figuring it out.
My method of figuring it out is usually the editor of the anthology that I'm contributing to going, so the story's due now. It's due in a week. Get us the story.
Guilty.
Okay. Which is why I'm very happy that these are short stories. But it's one of those things. It's easier now that my husband is no longer driving semi and that he's home, because I can actually spend physical time with him, and we're not on phones or computers like chatting back and forth. We can actually speak in person, or just hang out in person. So that frees up a bit more time to actually write stories or put down plot lines. Otherwise, a lot of it is just, turn off the television, click off social media, and put your butt behind the laptop and start typing.
Rob, you would be also, I think, somebody that this would be a prime question for. How do you manage it?
I have to take an even more extreme approach to dividing my time. When I have grant proposals due or professional papers or reviews or anything of the sort, I find myself mentally unable to write fiction. If I have something for work that's pending, even if I have procrastinated and said, oh, I don't have to have that. It's a review that's due next Friday. I can actually read the paper on Monday, write the review on Tuesday, and still be 3 days ahead of schedule. Even if I have procrastinated and not started till Tuesday, I can't spend that time writing. My brain just doesn't work that way. So what I basically have to do, I binge write. I will sit down and I will write 12 to 15,000 words in a 4-day weekend, mainly because I have to clear my desk of all of the professional obligations. And then I sit down and negotiate the time with my wife. And I say, I'm going to be writing this weekend. She says, okay, because she'll actually hold me to it. She'll come and check, make sure I'm not on social media and I'm not chatting with my friends on a video chat. And then I sit down, and for about 3.5 to 4 days, I will write. And that's essentially what I have to do to allocate the time.
Sarah, when people think of a full-time writer like yourself, they don't really think of scheduling. Like, oh, you got all the time in the world. But I'm wondering if maybe that's not quite what people believe. I mean, what the reality.
Well, part of the problem I have is the same as speaker, because my other writing job is nonfiction. And if I'm working on nonfiction, it blocks the fiction and vice versa. And then because I was the one at home for so many years, and the one who didn't have a schedule that couldn't be moved, I became the de facto keep everyone on track person, which means there are other people's schedules constantly intruding, and I lose track of what I was trying to do. I want to apologize for 2020. It's all my fault. Because
I hadn't heard that.
because Dan and I went out for a nice dinner for our anniversary, which is December 28th. And we were sitting there, and I said, now the kids are more or less out of our hair, kind of. They're on their own stuff. Let's make a schedule for me so that I know what I'm working on at any time. So we did a really tight schedule. And according to that schedule, it's somewhere around January 15th. Because I invoked the curse of I'm all organized now. Well, I'm not. Lately, the biggest distraction has been our younger son is staying with us. We don't know for how long, but for now he's here. So since I have manual labor available, we've been laying down floor in the house and taking up the almost dead carpets. It's really funny, but after a day of doing this, I can't write. I'm just kind of dead. And Cathe, I want to mention that I too tend to write that way, which is why I once wrote a novel in 3 days. It's only 80,000 words, but I got a really angry phone call from the editor, whom I had been lying to. Fortunately, the plot was all there because it's Plain Jane. It's about one of the wives of Henry VIII. So I knew what happened, and she dies at the end. But I wrote it in 3 days. And in one of those things that makes me look up at the ceiling and go, what am I supposed to learn from this? Even though it was work for hire with minimal royalties, that's my highest grossing novel to date.
Based on time?
Based on money. No, based on money.
Really?
It's been something like 20 years, and I still get a royalty check every time.
Oh, okay,
and
excellent.
It's one of those that makes me go, maybe I should write everything in 3 days.
In my defense, the short story was a little late the first time because I was buying a house, and the second time the short story was a little late because I was getting married. So I had really good excuses.
Excuses.
Yeah.
Yes,
sounds good to me.
But she promised her editor it would be done before all of that happened. Speaking as the editor in question, who's been bugging her. Yes,
I didn't even pick up on that part. Yeah, Bill, do you have a struggle with this, or do you have some magical solution system?
Well, it's not a magical solution, but it works for me. I actually get up an insanely early in the morning and right before I go to my day job. I'm lucky enough that I have pretty much an 8 to 4 day job every day. But the problem is I would get home, I had the kids and the house and the car and the dogs and everything. I'd get home after work and my brain would, we'd go to soccer practice, we'd eat dinner, and by 8 or 9 o'clock, my brain would be mush, and I couldn't write. But I found out that when I would get up early and I would, suck down a very large cup of coffee, I was very productive. So, for the last probably 10 to 15 years now, I've been writing about 2 hours every morning. Every weekday, and then I'll occasionally get I'll occasionally do a Sunday afternoon or an evening here and there, especially if I'm working on something that has a deadline that's coming up. And yeah, I would totally panic if I got down to 3 days before the novel was due.
Okay.
I would be locked up and worthless.
I was panicked. I don't think I slept for 3 days. So.
Okay. Les, let me ask you, what do you do? And that is, what do you focus on when you are doing your second draft? Are there specific aspects in your writing, say dialogue or descriptive beats or setting or trimming for tightness, or do you just try to improve everything? Or is your first draft so clean that you just send it immediately off to the editor?
Well, the second draft is where I really catch the continuity mistakes. And I'm reading through and I say, wait a minute, here I say this took 3 days, back there it implied it was 2 days, or wait a minute, this person's dead. That
Always inconvenient.
details,
Yeah.
you know. And so it really is the second draft that I read through for continuity problems to make sure it all holds together. I often end up rewriting sections or a chapter or moving something around. And it's only on, believe it or not, the third go through that I'll do a lot of the polish, the grammar, the tweaking of the descriptions or otherwise. So yeah, the second draft is really a continuity review for me. Does the story hold together? Did I get everything right on the major plot line? Is it solid?
Okay. Rob, let me ask you, somewhere in the mountain of how to write material I've read over the course of my life, I came across the phrase, figure out the absolute worst thing that could happen and then write that. Is that good advice? And if it is, do you follow it all of the time or just some of the time?
I don't actually figure out the worst thing that could happen. And yet that has come back around to bite me. You were talking about first draft, second draft, third draft less. And in my most recent novel, I was pretty much done. And I had 4 main characters and their stories are intertwined. And I realized I don't have an antagonist. I had an enemy. It's an alien invasion novel. And I had the aliens as an antagonist, but I didn't have, and I wanted to have, a human that throws a monkey wrench into all of the other plans. And so my second draft was adding 1/5 to the book because I added I added a 5th point of view character, and the idea is introducing these different people who have different jobs or in different parts in the world, and eventually they're all going to come together and interact, and their lives are going to intertwine. So I needed to go through and I say, okay, where am I? I actually try to start with a timeline. I try to figure out what's going to happen when, as opposed to what's the worst thing that could happen. And then I create characters. And by the way, I entirely blame that on Sarah. We're blaming each other for everything right now. And Sarah's entirely to blame for encouraging me to write characters.
Sarah, you have a response to that?
I'll accept the blame. I think he's a better writer for it.
Oh, okay.
Part of it is figuring out what's the worst thing that can, or the most interesting thing that can happen to that particular character. Because if your character has a particular problem with something, then that's the button you want to push, because that's what will bring the most interesting reaction. While the worst thing that can happen might not bring any reaction at all, because it's too big. And I spent several failed novels in my 20s breaking characters by doing what a friend of mine calls dropping walls on them, because just the worst possible thing would happen. And then I couldn't figure out anything for the character to do, because the worst already happened. Now what?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. My take on when I first got the advice was that they were worried that the writer might be too protective of their character, and they needed to abuse them at least a little bit. William, you have any thoughts on that particular idea, that abusing your character?
Oh yeah. I mean, generally it's, you start out with something minor going bad, and then you add on to that. You layer it on, and I don't think you can actually get to the part of the worst actual thing happening, because that would probably end the character or end the book. But you have to work your way in to a point where this is about the worst thing that can happen, and them still get out with their life, or them still accomplish what it is that they're setting out to do. So yeah, I try to layer it on thick, but I occasionally have the problem that Rob has with I get to the end and it's like there's not really an antagonist in this. It was nature against the man, or it was some some amorphous idea against the man, the woman, or whatever. But that's something that I try to keep focused on as well. So and go to weigh in a little bit on what the question you had asked, Les, is oftentimes in my second draft, I have a writers group, and I feed the first draft to them, and I generally learn things about the story when I talk to them that I didn't know. And I've been known to, cut away 2/3 of the original story and rewrite around that core that's left. And it almost is always a better story. So for me, that second draft is almost like, well, now I know what the story is really about. And now I can really restructure it the way that it needs to be. So.
Okay. My next question's for Cathe. Years ago, I read the book. I'm going to apologize in advance. This is a bit of a long question, but if you would bear with me. Years ago, I read the book Tobacco Road. I don't know if you guys have read that, but anyway, it surprised me in several ways. For example, its very first scene takes up both the first and second chapter. I'm not kidding. Also, let's see, and at least as startling to me as that was the conversation in that first scene. Two people are taking turns talking, just as in a normal conversation. But unlike a normal conversation, they were talking about completely different things. There was zero overlap. They were both asking questions, but not getting answers. Each person was so fixated on what they wanted at that moment that they could not hear that the other person's responses were unrelated. It opened my eyes as to what could be written into a conversation. Have any of you had a similar situation, that is, where you were reading something that totally opened your eyes concerning some way to write with greater impact? And Cathe, if you...
Yeah, I've had that with a couple of authors. Terry Pratchett did that for me in a number of his novels. David Weber has done it for me, particularly in discussing the finer points of emotions and the emotional spectrum. There's oh heavens. There have been a few authors for me that the way they approach the story was not something I was familiar with, or made me reconsider the scene in a new light. In my story in Stellaris, I opened it up with, there are very few phrases that you ever want to hear when you walk in the lab in the first thing in the morning. The ceiling collapsed, the lab was on fire, or any number of things. I drew those from real life. I've worked as a lab tech for a number of years now. Things
and the
happen.
Ceiling was on fire?
No, the ceiling collapsed.
Oh, the ceiling.
And the other one, someone decided it would be fun to pour some ethanol on a lab bench and light it on fire as a way to clean it. Burned off real quick, and meanwhile I'm going, no.
Oh, my word.
But and I think in part what you're alluding to, and I think maybe what I'm trying to dance around to is, that hook to get you into the story. Sometimes maybe you might want to play around with it a little bit. If that hook is what grabs the reader's interest and makes them want to keep reading, it behooves you to really try and figure out how to make an impact. And sometimes you can do that by experimenting. But again, it's one of those things that I think it's one of those things that can be approach it as an experiment. If it doesn't fly in the rough drafts, maybe you need to revisit it.
This question is to anybody, and it's possible nobody has a response to it, but I want to ask it anyway. Do you actively avoid creating characters that people can claim to be a Mary Sue? And if you do expend some effort in that direction, how exactly do you define a Mary Sue in order to avoid making one? Anybody?
I get the characters. I mean, the characters show up in my head and they're not me. I mean, I don't consciously build them. I have come to understand that I have this deal with my subconscious. It builds the characters and doesn't bother me. And when the character is ready, it's like, hi, I'm here and this is my story. And then the entire story is built around the character, which is also why I never end up with a secondary character as main character. But in that structure, Mary Sue doesn't arise. One of the funniest things that happened to me was being accused of the character of Dark Ship Thieves, Athena, being my Mary Sue. And I'm going, we're nothing alike. We're really nothing alike. In many ways, she's completely opposite to me. Yes, when I was young, I was also unduly aggressive, and that's the only thing we have in common. So, to me, the concept doesn't arise. As a reader, sometimes I'm reading a book and I say, oh, this is a perfect character that is perfect for the situation. Everything goes well. They do everything right. And sometimes it's a good book. I think it's all in how you handle it. If you actually establish, if you're writing it, and yes, it's what we call a Mary Sue character in terms of, and there is a book series I love that people keep saying, oh, but the character is a Mary Sue, and I'm going, doesn't matter. The character is perfectly positioned. Not everything is handed to him. He still has to struggle. He still is in danger. That's fine. I think the pejorative Mary Sue is and I've seen this, but only in people I'm mentoring. Like there was someone I was mentoring that their character would show up and the entire city loved him and they were throwing parades for him and he hasn't done anything. And it's like, that's a Mary Sue. That's wish fulfillment because the character hasn't shown. You've told us that he's wonderful and kind and sweet, but we haven't seen it in action. So to me, that's a Mary Sue. But that's almost more a lack of skill than is the character based on you or is the character a Superman or, I mean, there is such a thing as competence porn, and in the right frame of mind, I enjoy it. It doesn't. It's not a Mary Sue because the characters still have challenges.
Okay.
I think the best examples of Mary Sues can usually be drawn from Star Trek fan fiction. Because Ensign Mary Sue shows up for her very first day on the bridge, and the captain absolutely adores her. All of a sudden, the aliens show up, the consoles blow out, and only Mary Sue can fix it. And we have no idea what her training was. We don't know why she knows how to do this. We don't ever see any struggle. There's nothing she can't do. And one of the defining characters, if you actually look up a definition of a Mary Sue or a Marty Stew, it has less to do with an idealized version of the author as it does a character who has not earned the abilities that they show in the story. They haven't gone to the Starfleet Academy. They haven't spent time as a lieutenant. They haven't spent time as a helm officer or a security officer or all the things that build the leadership qualities. It's just they're there, they save the day, and everybody is ready to throw them a parade. That's where the Mary Sue problem comes in, is from a character development point of view, you've never developed the character. And the thing I try to do when I'm writing is write a character. And if they're encountering something that's going to give them PTSD, well, by gosh, I'm going to give my character PTSD. And if they're encountering something that is going to hurt, then they're going to be hurt and it's going to bother them. They lose the mission. They lose their spot on a mission. And then they start lashing out at all of their friends for no good reason. Why are you doing this? Well, they're reacting the way a person would act.
Okay. Okay. Well, I want to thank you for showing up for this panel for Dragon Con, and
Thank you, Steve.
that's about it. You guys have a wonderful day.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thanks so
Thanks.
much.
Bye.
It was great chatting
Bye-bye.
with everybody. Thank you. We hope you enjoy
Bye.
Stellaris.
Thank you. Bye.
I'm sure I will.
So one last thing to tell everybody is last year, the week after Dragon Con is when the trade paperback of Stellaris People of the Stars came out. The week before Dragon Con this year, we'd actually hoped to be on the site, on scene with everybody, handing out, selling, and autographing copies. And we're really sad that we can't. The mass market paperback is released and going to be on sale August 25th. And just in time for our virtual Dragon Con this year. And we think it's got a pretty neat collection of stories, and pick up a copy and browse through it.
This has been a special Dragon Con production by the Interstellar Research Group's YouTube video series team of From Here to the Stars. We hope you enjoyed this virtual panel, and hope you enjoy all of this year's virtual Dragon Con. We thank you for watching.